Phoenix, Arizona. July 14, 2067. Temperature, 52 degrees Celsius. The city has been without municipal water for 17 days. A mother holds an empty bottle under a public faucet that stopped flowing 3 weeks ago. Her daughter asks when they can take a bath again. She does not answer because she does not know. The last rain fell 4 months ago. The aquifer beneath the city has been dry for 6 years. The Colorado River stopped reaching Arizona in 2059. Water is rationed at 1 liter per person per day. If you can afford it. 1 liter costs what a week's salary used to buy. The corporations that own the desalination plants set the price. Supply and demand. Economics. The market decides who drinks and who does not. But Phoenix is not unique. It is happening everywhere. The Middle East has been in a state of permanent water conflict since 2048. North Africa's aquifers collapsed in the 50s. Central Asia's rivers were drained by 2062. The breadbaskets of the world turned to dust. Migration flows became floods. Borders became battlegrounds. This is not a drought. This is the new permanent condition. The hydrological cycle that sustained civilization for 10,000 years has been fundamentally altered. Too much carbon in the atmosphere. Temperature patterns shifted. Rain falls where it never fell before and stops falling where it always did. Glaciers that fed rivers for millennia have melted. Aquifers that took thousands of years to fill have been emptied in decades. The water wars of 2067 are not a single conflict. They are dozens of overlapping crises. Nations fighting over river sources. Corporations controlling desalination. Armed groups seizing reservoirs. Coastal cities building walls against climate refugees who fled inland droughts. The global order that existed for a century collapsing under the weight of thirst. This is the future we are building. Not might build. Are building. Right now. With every year we delay serious climate action. With every aquifer we drain. With every degree of warming we allow. 2067 is not distant science fiction. It is 42 years away. Many people watching this will live to see it. Your children almost certainly will. What does civilization look like when water becomes more valuable than gold? When the substance that covers 70% of the planet becomes the scarcest resource? When access to drinking water becomes the primary driver of geopolitics, economics, and human migration? Welcome to 2067. The year water became worth killing for. The year that changed everything. The year we can still prevent if we act now. To understand how we reach 2067, we need to understand the convergence of crises that built throughout the 21st century. Water scarcity was not new. What was new was the scale and the speed. Throughout history, civilizations rose and fell based on water access. Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the Maya. But those collapses took centuries. What happened between 2025 and 2067 took 4 decades. 3 factors converged. Climate change, population growth, aquifer depletion. Each would have been manageable alone. Together, they created a crisis without precedent. Climate change altered precipitation patterns in ways that climate models in the early 21st century underestimated. The warming was not uniform. Some regions experienced increased rainfall. Others experienced permanent drought. The problem was that the regions receiving more rain were not the regions where humans lived or where agriculture was established. The Sahara received more precipitation. Good for the desert. Terrible for the 700 million people in North Africa who depended on predictable Mediterranean climate patterns that shifted north. The Amazon basin flooded more frequently. The American Midwest, which fed a significant portion of the world, dried out. The Ganges, Indus, and Yellow rivers, fed by Himalayan glaciers, diminished to seasonal streams when the glaciers disappeared. Population growth exacerbated every problem. 8 billion people in 2025 became 10 billion by 2060. More people drinking. More people eating food that requires water to grow. More people living in cities that concentrate water demand. The efficiency gains in water use could not keep pace with the absolute increase in consumption. But the crisis accelerator was aquifer depletion. Humanity has been living on borrowed water for decades. Aquifers that recharged over thousands of years have been pumped dry in generations. The Ogallala Aquifer, beneath the American Great Plains. The North China Plain Aquifer. The Arabian Aquifer. All either depleted or rapidly approaching depletion by mid-century. When aquifers fail, surface water becomes the only source. When surface water decreases due to climate change, there is no backup. This was understood in the early 21st century. Reports warned about it. Scientists testified about it. The warnings were ignored or dismissed as alarmist, until they were not warnings anymore, but present reality. The first major conflict specifically attributed to water scarcity was the Nile crisis of 2048. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, completed decades earlier, gave Ethiopia control over Blue Nile flow. As rainfall decreased and the dam's reservoir demand increased, downstream water to Sudan and Egypt diminished. Egypt, dependent on the Nile for 95% of its fresh water, considered this an existential threat. The crisis escalated over 2 years. Diplomatic negotiations failed. Economic sanctions failed. In 2048, military action was taken. The dam was not destroyed but was significantly damaged. The conflict drew in regional powers. The African Union tried to mediate. The conflict eventually de-escalated, but not before significant casualties and economic damage. More importantly, it established a precedent. Water infrastructure could be a military target. Water access could justify armed conflict. Similar patterns emerged globally throughout the 2050s. The Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan, which had survived wars, collapsed when Pakistani aquifers failed and Indian dam projects reduced downstream flow. Central Asian nations fought over the remnants of rivers that once fed the Aral Sea. The Colorado River Compact in North America dissolved when upstream states could no longer deliver contractual water to downstream states because there was no water to deliver. By 2060, water had become the primary geopolitical resource, more important than oil, more important than rare earth minerals, more important than food, because without water, you cannot grow food. Nations with abundant water became regional powers. Nations without water became failed states. Subscribe if you want to understand how we got here and what it means for your future. Because 2067 is not the end of the story. It is the inflection point. The year that forced civilization to choose between cooperation and collapse. Let us examine what daily life looks like in 2067 for different segments of global society. Because the water crisis does not affect everyone equally. It creates a hierarchy of access that mirrors and amplifies existing inequalities. Tier 1, the water secure. Approximately 1 billion people live in regions with reliable water access. Northern Europe, Canada, parts of Scandinavia, New Zealand, Patagonia, Siberia. Regions that historically were cold or temperate now experiencing climate change as a benefit. More rain, melting permafrost revealing fresh water. These regions become migration magnets. Their borders become the most militarized on Earth. In these zones, water is still treated as abundant. People shower daily. Lawns are irrigated. Agriculture continues without crisis. But even here, attitudes have changed. Water waste is socially unacceptable. Technology for efficiency is ubiquitous. And the knowledge that they are privileged creates political tension. Do they have an obligation to share? Can they even share at the scale needed? Tier 2, the water precarious. Approximately 4 billion people. This includes most of what were developed nations in the early 21st century. United States, most of Europe, Japan, Australia, China. These nations have infrastructure. They have technology. They have wealth. They can afford desalination. They can afford water imports. They can afford adaptation. But it is expensive. Desalination plants line every coast, powered by solar farms and wind turbines because fossil fuels are no longer viable for energy-intensive processes. The water produced costs significantly more than water ever did historically. Home water bills are a major household expense. Agriculture has shifted entirely. Water-intensive crops are abandoned. Vertical farms using hydroponic systems become standard. Meat consumption collapses because livestock require too much water. Diets change. Culture changes. But people survive. In these societies, water shapes everything. Real estate near desalination plants is premium. Cities near coastlines are preferred because desalination is cheaper than transport. Inland cities depopulate. The American Southwest, once home to tens of millions, sees mass migration. Phoenix, Las Vegas, Albuquerque become small towns again. The population moves to the coast or to the water-rich north. Canada accepts American climate refugees. It is the greatest internal migration in United States history. And it happens without war. Just economic and environmental inevitability. Tier 3. The water impoverished. Approximately 4 billion people. Most of Africa. Most of the Middle East. Central Asia. Parts of South America. South Asia. These regions lack the wealth for desalination. They lack the infrastructure for massive water imports. They lack the technology for efficient agriculture. They face the crisis without adequate resources to respond. Here, water scarcity is existential. 1 liter per person per day, if you can afford it. Public fountains rationed by government or corporation depending on who controls the water. Long lines, hours of waiting, armed guards. Because water theft is common. Because desperation eliminates social norms. Agriculture has collapsed in these regions. You cannot grow food without water. These areas, which historically fed their populations, now depend on imports. But imported food requires foreign currency, which requires exports, which requires industrial base, which requires water. The cycle is vicious. Economies collapse. Governments fail. Societies fracture. Migration is the only option for tens of millions. They move toward water, toward coasts, toward wealthier nations. But those nations have built walls, physical and legal. Immigration has become the most contentious political issue globally, not because of culture or jobs, but because of water. Every new person is more demand on limited supply. The math is brutal. The politics are brutal. The human cost is catastrophic. In 2067, there are estimated to be 300 million climate refugees, people who have left their homes because remaining meant death. They move in waves, trying to cross borders, trying to reach cities, trying to find water. Some nations accept them. Most do not. Refugee camps house millions. Makeshift cities without infrastructure, without security, without hope. The humanitarian crisis is unprecedented in human history. And the violence. When people are thirsty, when children are dying, morality becomes flexible. Water convoys are attacked. Pipelines are sabotaged. Desalination plants are targeted. Criminal organizations control black market water. Prices are extortionate. People pay because the alternative is death. Warlords seize reservoirs and rivers. They charge for passage. They charge for water. They build empires on thirst. This is Tier 3. 4 billion people living in crisis. Not everyone suffers equally even within this tier. The wealthy can afford private wells if aquifers remain. They can afford bottled water from corporations. They can afford to leave. But the poor, the majority, they endure. They adapt. They survive on less than anyone thought humans could. They wait for rain that does not come. They hope for change that does not arrive. If this vision is making you uncomfortable, it should. Because this future is not inevitable. It is a choice we are making collectively right now. Every policy decision, every personal choice, every year of delay. We are building 2067 today. The corporate control of water in 2067 deserves its own examination. Because the privatization of water, which began in the late 20th century, reached its logical extreme in the water crisis. In the early 21st century, water was largely a public good. Municipal utilities, government control. The idea of private companies owning water sources was controversial. But as scarcity increased, private sector involvement increased. The argument was efficiency, innovation, capital investment. Governments, especially in developing nations, lacked funds for infrastructure. Private companies offered to build desalination plants, to maintain pipelines, to manage distribution, in exchange for fees, for profit. By 2040, the largest water corporations had become more powerful than many governments. They owned desalination plants. They held contracts for municipal water supply. They controlled water rights. They employed private security. They had legal departments larger than government agencies. And they operated in a market where demand was literally infinite. Everyone needs water. No one can substitute. Perfect market conditions for profit maximization. The top 5 water corporations in 2067 control 70% of global desalinated water. They operate under various names but are owned by conglomerates that also own food, energy, and technology. Vertical integration. Control the water, control the food production, control the economy. Their market capitalization exceeds most national budgets. Their CEOs are more influential than most heads of state. The pricing model is what you would expect. Price according to what the market will bear. In wealthy nations, water is expensive but available. In poor nations, water is priced at the absolute maximum people can pay before mass death becomes politically untenable. This is not cruelty. This is fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Maximize profit within legal constraints. The law does not require affordable water. It requires contract compliance. Critics call it extortion. Defenders call it market efficiency. The reality is that corporations provide water where governments cannot or will not. Without private desalination, coastal cities in Tier 2 nations would collapse. The corporations built the plants. They maintain them. They employ millions. They pay taxes. They are, in their view, providing a service. But the model has consequences. In 2067, there are regions where rain is owned. Literally. Cloud seeding technology advanced significantly. Corporations can trigger rainfall. They hold patents. They offer services to governments and agricultural companies. For a fee, they will make it rain over your region. The legality is disputed. The ethics are clear. But the practice is common because it works. This creates absurdities. Rain that would have fallen naturally is now triggered artificially and monetized. Downstream regions that would have received that rain receive less. They sue. International courts are overwhelmed with water litigation. The legal framework from the early 21st century, designed for a different world, is inadequate. New law is being written in real time. Precedents are set. Water becomes the most litigated resource in human history. Some nations rejected the corporate model. They maintained public control. They built state-owned desalination. They rationed water through government systems. The results were mixed. Some succeeded. Strong governments with significant resources, like several northern European nations, maintained public water. But many governments lacked the capital, the expertise, or the political stability. Their public systems failed. Black markets emerged. Corruption was rampant. In some cases, privatization was accepted as the lesser evil. The philosophical question became unavoidable. Is water a human right or a commodity? The United Nations declared water a human right in 2010. But rights without enforcement are aspirations. In 2067, the enforcement mechanism is wealth. If you can pay, you have water. If you cannot, you have the right to thirst. Cynical, but accurate. Some corporations, to their credit, implemented humanitarian programs. Free water for the extremely poor. Subsidized rates for low-income households. Investment in public infrastructure. Corporate social responsibility. Whether this is altruism or public relations is debatable. The impact is real. Millions receive water they otherwise would not. But it is charity, not entitlement. It can be withdrawn. And the fundamental power dynamic remains. Corporations control access to life. The resistance to this model also exists. Pros. Rights. Water liberation movements. Groups that sabotage corporate infrastructure. Steal water. Distribute it freely. They are called terrorists by governments and corporations. They are called heroes by those they serve. The line between freedom fighter and criminal depends on perspective and thirst. In 2067, water is not just a resource. It is power. Political power. Economic power. Military power. Whoever controls water controls populations. This was always true. Ancient civilizations understood it. But in 2067, the scale is global. The control is concentrated. And the stakes are survival. Let us talk about the technology and adaptation strategies that exist in 2067. Because humanity does not simply accept crisis. Humans are innovative, especially when survival depends on it. Desalination technology has advanced dramatically. Early 21st century desalination was energy-intensive and expensive. By 2067, efficiency has improved by an order of magnitude. Solar-powered reverse osmosis, advanced membranes, reduced energy costs. Desalination is still expensive but economically viable at scale. Every coastal city of significance has multiple plants. The ocean becomes the primary freshwater source for billions. But desalination has limits. It produces brine as byproduct. Highly concentrated saltwater that cannot simply be dumped into oceans without ecological consequences. In 2067, coastal ecosystems near major desalination zones are severely degraded. Brine disposal remains an unsolved problem. Solutions are being researched. Some plants deep inject brine into geological formations. Some evaporate it for salt extraction. Some discharge carefully managed flows. None are perfect. The environmental cost is accepted as necessary. Atmospheric water generation is another technology. Machines that extract moisture from air. Effective in humid environments. Less effective in dry regions where they are most needed. But the technology improves. By 2067, industrial-scale atmospheric water generators operate in moderately humid zones. They provide supplemental water. Not enough to solve the crisis, but enough to matter. Water recycling has become total. Every drop is captured and reused. Gray water from sinks and showers is treated and used for toilets and irrigation. Black water from toilets is processed to potable standards. The psychological barrier of drinking recycled sewage, which existed in the early 21st century, has disappeared. Survival overrides disgust. The technology is mature. Treatment processes are robust. The water is safe. In 2067, there is no such thing as wastewater. Only water in different stages of use. Agricultural adaptation is perhaps the most significant. Traditional agriculture, which consumed 70% of fresh water globally, has been revolutionized. Open field irrigation is extinct in most of the world. Water is too precious. Precision agriculture, using drip systems. Vertical farms in climate-controlled buildings. Hydroponic and aeroponic systems that use a fraction of the water. Genetic engineering of drought-resistant crops. Shifting to crops that require less water. The agriculture of 2067 bears little resemblance to the agriculture of 2025. Meat consumption has declined by 80% globally. Livestock require immense water. The water footprint of beef made it economically non-viable for most people. Synthetic meat and plant-based alternatives became standard. This was not a smooth transition. Cultural resistance was significant. But economics is a stronger force than culture. When meat costs what a car used to cost, consumption drops. Protein comes from plants, insects, and lab-grown alternatives. Diets have fundamentally changed. Infrastructure has transformed cities. Every building captures rainwater. Even occasional rain is too valuable to lose. Rooftop collection. Permeable pavements that channel water to storage. Underground cisterns beneath every structure. Cities are designed around water capture and recycling. The urban landscape looks different. More storage. More treatment facilities. More pipes. Water infrastructure is visible. Celebrated. Critical. Policy has also evolved. Water markets exist. Tradable water rights. Some find this abhorrent. Others argue it is efficient allocation. Agricultural regions sell water rights to cities. Upstream users sell to downstream users. The price signals where water is most valued. Economists argue this prevents waste. Critics argue it creates injustice. Both are probably right. International cooperation forced by crisis has increased. The United Nations Water Commission, established in 2052, mediates disputes, enforces agreements, monitors water usage, sanctions violators. It has more authority than any previous international body because the alternative is war. Nations comply because the cost of non-compliance is higher. Not perfect, not always effective, but better than the alternative. Some nations have pursued aggressive solutions. Cloud seeding programs, iceberg towing from Antarctica to Middle Eastern ports, massive pipeline projects spanning continents. The economics are questionable, but desperation justifies attempts. Some projects succeed. Some fail spectacularly. But the attempts continue because doing nothing is not acceptable. And there are glimmers of hope. Regions that implemented early aggressive water conservation have stabilized. Communities that invested in infrastructure in the 2030s are relatively secure in the 2060s. Nations that took climate change seriously early have adapted better than those that delayed. The correlation is clear. Early action works. Late action is more expensive and less effective. But any action is better than none. 2067 is not the end. It is an inflection point. The crisis forced innovation, forced cooperation, forced change. The question is whether these changes come fast enough, whether they scale enough, whether humanity can transition from a civilization built on abundance to one built on careful management. The answer is being written year by year, decision by decision. We will know by century's end whether we made it. So, here we are, 2067, a future that exists in projections, in models, in warnings, not yet in reality, but closer than we want to believe. The water wars did not start in 2067. They are starting now. Already, conflicts over water shape geopolitics. The Nile, the Jordan, the Mekong. These are not hypothetical future disputes. They are present tensions, managed for now, but growing. The foundations of 2067 are being laid today. The scenarios described in this video are not predictions. They are possibilities, informed by climate science, by hydrology, by economics, by history. We know how much warming causes how much precipitation change. We know how fast aquifers are depleting. We know how many people need how much water. The math is not mysterious. The trajectory is clear if we continue as we are. But trajectories can change. This is not deterministic. 2067 as described does not have to happen. It will happen if we continue current policies, if we continue current consumption, if we continue delaying serious climate action. But choice exists. Agency exists. We can change course. What would that require? On the large scale, aggressive climate mitigation, emissions reduction, transition to renewable energy, protection of water sources, investment in infrastructure, international cooperation. These are not small asks. They require political will, economic investment, cultural change, but they are achievable, technically feasible, economically viable. We know how to do this. The question is whether we will. On the personal scale, water consciousness, understanding that every choice involving water has consequences, reducing personal consumption, supporting policies that protect water, voting for representatives who take water seriously, consumer choices that favor water efficiency. These individual actions are small but cumulative. Culture shifts one person at a time. And recognizing privilege. If you live somewhere with reliable water, you are in the global minority. That will become more true. Understanding that water security is not guaranteed, that it is maintained through policy and infrastructure, that it can be lost. This awareness should motivate preservation and compassion for those already in crisis. The water wars of 2067 are a warning, a vision of where current trends lead. The purpose is not to depress or frighten, but to motivate. Because warnings can be heeded. Futures can be changed. We have 42 years. That is time. Not unlimited time. Not comfortable time. But enough time if we act seriously starting now. Share this video if you think more people should understand where we are heading. Because the scale of change required needs popular support. Governments move when populations demand movement. Corporations change when markets demand change. Culture shifts when individuals shift. You are part of this. Your awareness matters. Your choices matter. Your voice matters. Welcome to Tomorrowborn, where we explore possible futures to help you understand present choices. 2067 is not inevitable. It is a choice point. The decisions made in the next decade will determine whether we build the world described in this video or something better. We still have time. Let us use it wisely. The water wars can be prevented. But prevention requires action. Not later. No. The clock is running. The aquifers are depleting. The climate is changing. 2067 is being built today. What will you do to change it?